Hey class, sorry that the lectures are late this week. I hope it hasn't upset anybody's schedule or anything like that. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns regarding these lectures or anything else. Hopefully you are getting some good feedback from your classmates regarding your proposals. I have and will continue to offer some feedback based off of what I see. One thing that I'm noticing in the proposal so far, and this is just a general comment that I should help all of you out, is it seems that most of you are writing to very um, ill-defined auditors. By that I mean you're talking to groups of people rather than individuals or committees or individual firms or things like that. In the past, I've seen a lot of success from people that chose specific farmers to talk to rather than all tobacco farmers, or that have talked to an engineering firm or a potential client, like a very specific client that is looking for help designing a structure or whatever else. Even if you make up the client, as long as you've done a clear profile um, and have a clear sense of what that potential client would need, you're better off than writing to a large group. And that's mainly because you guys are new technical communicators and you don't have the experience and to write to a larger group as you might do in some formats later on. Um, so just get more specific. This week, we will be talking about the proposal in more detail, but as a way to help us consider the larger projects and the final technical reports that are coming later on. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. If you want to talk with me, just shoot me an email and we'll set up a time to talk. I usually need at least 24 hours notice because I am, co-parenting with my wife right now, and we both work full time, so we gotta shuffle schedules around. But if you let me know you want to talk, we can usually get together. And so just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to talk with you guys. So today we're going to talk about literature reviews, but I want to do a quick review of what we talked about last week, real quick. Um, so um, Last week we talked, believe it or not, about lab reports. I don't do a lot to delve into the specifics of a lab report, mainly because most everybody is familiar with them. You've all written them. I've written lab reports, and I was an English major, um, and I think I've written lab reports since I've been at UK, and I was a PhD in English. So we've all done this. So you know the basic format. But one thing I want to emphasize again is that these basic organizational structures, or these basic organization of what the rhetorical moves are, what different sections of a lab report would look like, are much more strict in a lab report because, and I've mentioned this last week and I've mentioned in the past as well, lab reports rely on this sense of objectivity in order to be effective. It's about building knowledge over decades and with people that you don't know. And so that sense of objectivity is crucial to help people understand whether or not they can trust the lab report, trust the results, and build off of it. That's why lab reports tend to have a much stricter set of conventions or constraints, and much stricter delineation between the sections than field reports or recommendation reports or things like that have. So just make sure that you treat each section distinctly in lab reports, and that you keep an eye on that need for objectivity at least until the discussion section, so that you have um, provided the data before tainting it in the eyes of what most lab reports are treated as, tainting it with your own subjectivity. So you have the data there that stands on its own, and then the discussion and the conclusion try to frame that. Um, you guys are familiar with this, so I don't have to go into it too much. We also last week talked about the front and back matter. Okay, remember, front matter is not officially part of the report. That's why it's given Roman numerals. Okay, it's there to help the auditor understand how to read the document. That's what its main goal is. So your title page, it includes the title, the reddors, the data submission. That lets me know, okay, basically you know, first impressions, who wrote this and what is it about, so I can get a sense of how much time it's going to take to read it, but also like whether or not to read it because it's 15 years old and irrelevant now or whatever else. Some other elements that might be included are these things. We talked about it last week. Now, one thing I want to mention in particular, because I don't think I mentioned it last week, is this idea of where an executive summary and an abstract go. An executive summary is always, and if you didn't do this for the collaborative report, it's not the end of the world. An executive summary is always right after the title page and given Roman numerals. It is not on page 1 because it is not officially part of the report. It's a summary of what's going to be in the report. So it's a way to help them understand what's coming. And so your executive summary is 5%. It talks about fit. It talks about implications. Your abstract. This can move around a little bit. It doesn't have to be immediately after the title page. In fact, sometimes it is on the title page, and sometimes it's on page 1 of the report. It just kind of depends. But because it's shorter, it's only 200 words. Abstracts move around a little bit. But either way, these are considered part of front matter because all front matter is there to help frame the report and help the auditor understand how to read it, how quickly, how in-depthly, all that sort of stuff. Table of contents. Okay, so you're helping readers find relevant information quickly. You guys all have used table of contents. List of illustrations does that for tables and graphs. You can break tables and graphs into separate lists if you choose. But either way, these are ways to provide a quick rundown of what's in it, because if the table of contents is organized that way, then okay, basically this is how it's going to go, how the report's going to go or whatever else, but also where I can find that information. Real quick, because I know I didn't talk about this last time, I do want to mention that if you are using Word, then what you can do, or any word processing program, is what you can do is generate an automated table of contents. If you don't know how to do this, then that's fine. I'm trying to give you a rundown. If you do, then you can probably skip forward a little bit. So basically, if you're using these styles or these automated styles, one thing that it does is it helps generate metadata that can then be used to develop a clear table of contents. And the same thing can be true of the list of illustrations, although that's not as good of an automation. It's not as consistent. But you can just develop your own table of contents. So I have been using this for heading 1s throughout the digital communication assignments that you guys have been doing throughout the semester. And you can see here under under references, the reference tab, this is Microsoft Word, you can see, okay, insert a table of contents. Now, if you just do a quick search for automated table of contents and then whichever word processing program you're using, you should be able to find a way to do this. So you can do a manual table of contents or you can do automatic. So I'll just do an automatic, and you can see, okay, it's broken it down into the different sections for me, so I have a clear breakdown. Okay, page 1, page 10, whatever else. This way I have it developed for me. I don't have to go in and put that all in. And the other benefit of this is that it generates the page numbers based off of where it is in the text. It's automatic, it's good, it's done. But, and this is a clear thing that I want you to make sure of before turning in your final technical report or your proposal or whatever else, make sure one of the last things you do as part of proofing your paper is update the table. Because right now it says that technical communication in situ starts on page 1, but because I've inserted a table of content, it's not on page 1 anymore. It just was on page 1 when the thing was put together. So if I update the table, okay, then you can see all of a sudden it starts on table 2 and we're down to 11 pages. So you just want to make sure and do that last, because if you're moving things around or adjusting graphics or anything like that, things can get switched around, and you want to make sure that's the last thing you do. All right. So in general, I hope that helped. Um, but that's basically how to do it. Back matter, I'm sure some of you put this together for the collaborative research report, uh, but basically provides additional information that's not essential, it's not necessary, but it's useful. Or so if you have an auditor that prefers context or anything like that, then maybe you'll find that you want to put this together. Front matter provides concise information about how to read the document. Back matter clarifies essential content provided in the report. That's the main goal. That's what it's doing. I don't know why I cleared out those arrows, but whatever. The other thing we talked about at the end of last week was this idea of tortuous syntax. If we go back to Pinker, we talked about that right branching stuff and using complex sentences versus compound sentences versus whatever else. The only thing I want to say, and we'll talk about this again before the end of the semester, but make sure that you are trying to favor right branching sentences. And the reason you do that, the reason you add new information further into a sentence is mainly because it adds emphasis on the new information, but in terms of the way that we process it, English syntax demands subject before object. Okay, subject, usually the actor, is something that's well understood. So it also adds into this idea of human memory and comprehension demand topic before comment or given before new or light before heavy. And this is the way of saying light information, light memory. This is things that we already know. It doesn't take much time to think about it. Heavy concepts require a little more thought to develop them. The further they are to the right in a sentence, or the further they are in a sentence, then the better. And the reason that is just because that's how we process things in English, especially, but in human memory. That's why English works left to right. It's the way we think about things, but it also helps develop the way we remember things is left to right because we're used to reading in that way. And so you just want to build into that and don't mess with it too much because that'll help your auditor follow along. So I just want to give a quick review of the proposal. I know we talked about this last time, but we're going to talk about lit reviews, and so that's a major part of that or it's a major part of the introduction to a final report, but also to your proposal. So I want to just do a quick review. So we have we have proposals. You have internal, external, solicited, unsolicited. You have requests for proposals and invitation for bids. These are things that relate to research or service documents, and they lead to solicited external proposals usually. Um, you know, we've talked about this. We also talked about how the the goal of any proposal is to make an argument for the purpose of your final report and specify the audience for that report. Now, in a formal proposal to an auditor, you're not going to specify who that auditor is, except in a memo of transmittal or something like that. But for this final technical report, for the proposal rather, for the final technical report, you can write this to your audience, and that's a way to specify who you're writing to. Or you could write this to me and include a section that specifies who the auditor for your final technical report will be. Either way, you want to make sure that it's somebody very specific and whose concerns you can consider and appeal to, especially in a persuasive document like a proposal. Okay. You need to note the relevance of background information and initial research. Okay. I'm sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. This idea of auditor exigence, it's not just like de facto, you know, going to be understood why this is a problem or opportunity that the auditor well understands well. Okay, so you need to make an argument about the purpose of your final report in a proposal, because especially if it's an external, unsolicited proposal, which a lot of you are writing for your final technical report, your auditor is not going to necessarily be aware of the opportunity that's available to them or the problem that's they're facing. So you need to define that problem and then make sure that they understand what's going on in order to help them understand the content and the context around it. And then you need to specify work schedule and evaluation techniques. These are all parts of proposals, mainly because it's the genre. That's what the genre entails. Some of it is implied, especially in informal proposals, but this is the nature of it. Um, when you're composing a proposal, you all obviously want to make sure you have a sense of who you're writing for, auditor profile, that you have contextual research, and that you have a sense of what the process is, all that breakdown. We talked about this last week, so I'm not going to go into it too much because I feel like I'm running on. But the other part of this is planning the process, which we'll get to in the next lecture, lining up credentials, and writing the proposal. These are things that you have to do in order to make an effective pitch for why this project should be taken on by you, which is the central rhetorical question for any formal, informal, whatever proposal. We're going to talk today mainly about contextual research as a foreground to the introduction as part of the proposal, and all that sort of stuff. Next lecture, as I mentioned, we'll talk about planning the process. So you have these different sections. We talked about it. If you need a refresh, you can go back to last week. I will say that one of the things that I want to mention, I talk about the budget, the task schedule, and the evaluation plan as appendices. That's just a way of thinking about them as not necessarily essential elements of the persuasive argument. If you're making an argument for why this is a problem that needs to be better understood by the audience, okay, or this is an opportunity that needs to be taken advantage of by the audience, then you need to define the problem. You need to have a clear sense of how you're going to approach it with the project and why the rhetor in question is qualified to do that. Um, the budget definitely comes into play with a lot of these decisions, but it's also supplementary because if you haven't defined the project or the problem well, then the budget can seem out of whack no matter what. So it's extra information. Same with task schedule, same with evaluation plan. They are not going to be set apart as an appendix, but they are non essential information that is part of the genre, but not necessarily part of the argument. Okay, so just a way to think about this. The task schedule we'll talk about again. Your evaluation plan, blah blah blah. So we talked last week about the introduction. You define the central problem or opportunity. What is the problem? What is the purpose of the proposal? When you're talking about it, be specific and frame it in terms that are relevant to the auditor. Again, the more specific the auditor, the easier it is to frame the problem or the opportunity for that audience. I had one student ask me earlier today whether they should be right, like they floated their idea for the final technical report to me, and it seemed nice, but the one thing I told them is if you're talking about a specific disease in cattle, well, knowing what kind of cattle are on a farm and how many heads are there or whatever else, knowing the specifics of that farmer's operation can help you really identify the urgency of the problem and why they need to be aware of it if you're going to give them an information report about a common disease in beef cattle. So that's something, knowing the audience helps frame the information more specifically instead of trying to write to all people with all kinds of all breeds of cattle and all sorts of stuff like that. So you have to have a specific frame of reference for them. We talked about this with Hareen, and specifically talking about the community of task that has a distinct exigence and a definite terminal deliverable. That's what your final technical report is. And you have a unique demands of a given rhetorical situation, a unique auditor with unique content that you're trying to help them understand. We also, if you haven't yet, make sure to narrow in the scope of your project by answering these questions so that you have a better understanding of what that project would entail and can therefore define it more easily for the auditor. Let's get past this. That's also helps you talk about the purpose of the proposal and framing everything in a clear introduction. Okay. Now, part of this is definitely knowing what is the background or how well do you understand the problem or the opportunity. And one way to do that is to have a clear sense of what literature is relevant to understand the problem, what literature is relevant to understanding a solution, or whatever else. And these kinds of questions require research and require a frame that helps the audience understand not just why is this problem important to them, but who else has looked at this and what have they found. Okay, so this, when we say what literature, for those of you that are new to this or not as familiar, literature is just a way to talk about the scholarship, whether it's official and published or gray literature or whatever else, that helps you understand what's going on. So if you're working for a firm, a construction firm that's been doing, landslide reparations for 50 years, then you can write a proposal for the Kentucky state government and saying, okay, we can repair this road in this amount of time based off of years of experience. So previous projects could be considered, or the way the reports on those previous projects can be considered gray literature that helps you understand the problem. So you can bring that in and help you talk about it. Or you could look at, publications or tradecraft or that sort of stuff to help you better talk about this. So this is where a literature review comes in handy. This is what a literature review is for. It's for justifying your project beyond just the auditor's concerns. This is for helping them understand what's going on and what are other people saying about this problem, this opportunity, this exigence, and why it might be relevant to your auditor. So literature review does a couple of things. It brings the auditor up to speed on a problem or opportunity, and this is where I was talking about that understanding of the exigence. If it's a solicited proposal or solicited report, then they have a clear understanding of what the problem or opportunity is, but you still need to define it and bring them up to speed on what other people understand about it and what their understanding of the content is, or of what the report will be. And then you have to contextualize the argument, and that's the main goal of literature reviews, to provide that context, to help someone understand not just what the report is, but where it sits in a larger conversation, so they can find relevant stuff that helps them better understand stuff or get a sense of where other people are doing. And that always helps people make decisions or helps them better understand a problem. And then it does establish ethos for the reader, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. Is also just basically standard practice to do this. It is a convention. It's not necessarily a constraint, but it is a rhetorical convention to have lit reviews in some form in most technical genres. So, purpose of literature review is twofold. First, by reviewing the relevant scholarship, the reader demonstrates knowledge and understanding of the most salient published work about the topic or exigence. This is from the McNeely reading, modified a little bit, obviously. But it's basically just, when we talk about salient published work, you're just basically talking about what's going on, what's the important conversation, what are people saying about this problem, what are people saying about this opportunity, what have they done in the past, whatever else. You want to make sure that you are bringing your auditor into that conversation so that they can feel like they understand what's going on. And the less informed they are, the longer your lit reviews tend to be. But, or the more academic are, the more they need the context, the longer your lit reviews tend to be. But you're trying to help them understand what are other people saying, so that as they read your report, they can follow it, and they feel like they have a good footing to better understand the problem, the opportunity, the research methodology, whatever else you're talking about. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit before, but if you're to have this rhetorical project, if we're talking about in terms of, well, how am I providing in terms of, you have this task, you have this unique demands of a given rhetorical situation with a unique relationship to the exigence. Well, then what's the lit review help you do? it helps you as the reader establish, oops, establish the context, or it helps you establish um, for your auditor how they can understand what other people have said, the context around that rhetorical situation about this content, and we'll get to this in a second, it helps the auditor trust you because you are showing them that you understand the context. It helps them understand, okay, this person seems to know what they're talking about, so I can trust him or her or them to do what they need to do when it comes to this project. So, in terms of like pure persuasion, a lit review helps show that you know what you're talking about more than a lot of other things that you can do, and also helps the auditor understand what the content that you're getting into is. So it recaps an important conversation, and it also, by reviewing the relevant scholarship, creates space for a new and unique contribution. Okay, and what this basically comes down to is it provides a rationale and sets the stage for the rest of the report. It helps your auditor understand, okay, this is what people have said. Now what? Okay, and you can leave that blank and let them fill in the blanks, but that's not what technical writing is. You're trying to help provide information so they can effectively use it. Well, you can't provide more information without bringing them up to speed on what you know about the issue and what they should know about the issue. And so you need to bring them up to speed, set that baseline, that foundation, and then you give them the sense of urgency and set the stage for the rest of the report and whatever else you're going to talk about. So if we go back to this idea of the overall like organizational rhetorical moves or whatever else of an information report, then if you break it down, the lit review is providing that context for the findings. Okay. A well curated literature review. It doesn't have to include everything that's ever been said on the subject. In fact, it shouldn't. It should be tailored to the needs of the auditor and curated so they have a sense of what's going on, of the conversation and where it is, and not of the entire history of a topic. And that's something that you want to consider as you go along. In terms of a proposal, okay, the lit review is actually kind of wrapped up in part of both the introduction and the plan of work. And by that I mean you have to define the problem or opportunity. Well, that'll help to have a sense of it based off of what other people have said about it. So that involves research. Okay. And you also have to show that you know what you're talking about in terms of research protocols and in terms of where you can find other stuff, secondary literature. Well, research protocols can be based off of what previous studies have done. That involves lit review. It can also be based off of, if you know you're going to look into this, well, why do you know you need to look into that? Because of seeing uh, seeing trends and topics develop over the course of the conversation. Okay. So, regardless of the place of a literature review, whether that's in the beginning, in the introduction to an information report, or in the discussion section of a lab report, or whatever else, you always want to follow the same basic organization. These tend to be their own sections, or at least subsections, and they also tend to have sections within themselves. So heading level 2, 3, 4, whatever else. So basically, you have a meta-discursive introduction, and this is just a way of saying, here's my lit review, or here I'm going to talk about what other people have said about this topic, or here I'm going to talk about what's coming next. And meta-discursive just means you're going to introduce it and say, okay, first I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this. In speeches, this is referred to as a roadmap. It's just basically, it's just a way of previewing so that someone can read strategically through that section. But it's also a way of helping them understand, okay, here's how I'm going to look at it. And then typically you have subtopics 1, 2, maybe 4, whatever else. And then you turn to argumentative analysis. And what I'm talking about when I talk about argumentative analysis is this idea of making space that McNeely talks about. Making space for your own argument, but you're basically saying, okay, this all means that X, or this all means that Y. And it's a way to show where your proposal is going to go. Okay, so if I am writing a technical report for a very specific farmer, you say, well, this has been happening throughout Kentucky farms for the last 15 years. That's subtopic one. This has been happening in the beef cattle industry for the last 5 years. That's subtopic two. And as a result of these two things, I think you should do this. And you're just previewing what's coming next. Okay, create space for your unique project and transitions from previous conversations to your own contribution. So why is someone reading ahead? Okay. I've gone on for a little bit longer than I want to, so I'm not going to go through all this sort of stuff. But you can review this stuff about persuasion to see, how framing your lit review can help propulse you towards a more effective proposal overall. But I did want to mention a couple more things. Lit reviews tend to fall into three camps. Okay, you have developmental reviews that track the evolving understanding of a topic. Okay, you have thematic reviews that partition the scholarship into relevant topics, and you have controversy-based reviews, and these trace emerging and/or contested conversations about a given topic. As you can see, they're all related to the different topics, so you can have within one subtopic a developmental review, within another subtopic a thematic review. It's up to you, but basically, you're trying to help your auditor understand what's going on. And because of the nature of the types of auditors that you're talking to, and the things that they tend to be more concerned with, developmental reviews tend to be more focused on the practical sciences. And so they track evolving understanding of a topic in order to better understand why you need to regularly clean up your. I was trying to think of an example, but it's going to take me too long, so I'll just leave it there. So the understanding of a topic it's usually a more specific topic than like a broad content base, but something very specific. But you're trying to help them understand how we've gotten to where we are, and usually that's practically oriented, so it's engineering oriented. The hard sciences, you tend to talk to chemistry, physics, that sort of stuff. They tend to talk to very specific groups of people that already have a basic understanding of development, and so you offer thematic reviews that are using relevant topics that everybody that the auditor is well versed in. And so the thematic review relies on a clear understanding of who you're talking to. The humanities, because of the long view of most of those disciplines, controversy base is a way to narrow in and allow you to talk about people over the course of 150 years and how they see things differently. It tends to allow for a little clear lit reviews when you're talking about that kind of thing that can take forever if you were to take a developmental approach. But this is not always the case. Sometimes you might want to talk about something in terms of controversy based. So for instance, if you're talking about propulsion in, interstellar flight, I read a lit review from one of my students last semester that used this as a controversy based review. And it was very useful because he was talking about in terms of where there is active debate going on, and it was useful to think about it in those terms rather than as just a simple developmental understanding of a topic. But you guys can figure that out on your own. Overall, regardless of which kind of review you're following, you also want to basically think about these organizational patterns and use those to great effect within subtopics and that sort of thing as well. And then make sure it's all coherent. The other thing I'll say, in order to build to the ultimate goal of providing space, you want to make sure to avoid simply reporting on your research. And one thing to think about with a lot of students, they tend to be less confident and take less ownership of the secondary literature that they read, and as a result, they tend to direct quote rather than paraphrase. Paraphrasing shows understanding, which is key to that ethos building that is central to a lit review. And it allows you to not simply report on, but build off of and and comment on the research that you've done instead of just reporting, okay, I found this and then I found this and then I found this. And then you want to focus on trends, not on specific articles. So trends between articles are much more poignant and useful for auditors than simply saying, okay, this article says this article says this. That's the reporting. Trends are commentary, and um, so it's just more useful to think in those terms. So in terms of lit reviews, make sure that on Canvas you try to answer these questions. If you haven't, so for number one, what organizational convention of the lit review genre do you see most often in articles that you read for your major? Uh, if you haven't thought much about articles in your major, or you haven't had a chance to read a lot of like biology articles or medical articles or anything like that, then I would encourage you to think about the articles that you're reading for your proposal or for your final technical report. And then, what is the most important subtopic that your auditor should be brought up to speed on in order to understand your intended project? In other words, what do you need to research, or what have you researched that is going to be vital for your auditor to understand? Because if we're thinking about how do we help our auditor understand the context of the conversation, then you need to think about it in these terms. Keep up with the reading. Let me know if you have any questions, and feel free to reach out to me to schedule a meeting if you need to talk or want to talk. Sorry this went on for so long. Take care, and I'll see you at the next lecture.